Hello and welcome everyone. This is Qlik Meetup Austria 6. And today we are joined by Dennis Jaskowiak from Qlik. Dennis is Senior Solution Architect, is that correct?
It's principal now, but
Principal, I'm sorry, principal. Solution Architect. And he has wrote an amazing article about CSS tweaking for standard applications, which we will refer to in this presentation. And yeah, the idea is to get a better picture, to see some real-time examples, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Just before we get into it, let me briefly make some housekeeping and yeah, just give you an overview. So as said, this is a meetup group, so we are a non-commercial group, so we are just focusing on developments and tweaks about around this product. We are recording everything, so this will be banned on YouTube later on. Of course, we can cut something out, but we usually don't. Yeah, please feel free to ask questions. We highly appreciate the interaction, and you are by default muted, but you have the right to unmute yourself, and we highly welcome you to that. So without further ado, let's give it up for Dennis. Hello, and yeah, what do you have for us today?
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for having me on the call and give me the opportunity to present the content that I've created. So let me just share my screen. As already mentioned, this is not a presentation where we will run through, so it's not a PowerPoint battle that we like to start. It's talking about my expertise that I collect through the CSS things that I've created, and also talking about the project that I call Qlik Sense CSS Masterclass. What is the Masterclass? Or maybe let's first start with a couple of things about me. So as mentioned, I'm Dennis Jaskowiak. I'm working now for about 8 years at Qlik. Yeah, someone who is located in Germany, and also working for the pre-sales department. And I'm pretty often need to create user appealing applications. So something where you say, okay, this needs to get the attention directly when we present it to the customer. And this is also why we need to try to create things as shiny as possible. And this took me to work on the CSS class. I mean, as you all might know, normally Qlik Sense dashboards are looking like that. This is our sales demo, or our normal sales demo that we had, I think, in the year 2016, 2017. So, of course, quite a few years ago. But I think it's not looking very charming. And of course, if we have a look on the competition is looking a little bit better. So we really started to think about how could we do this in more shiny? How could we make this more user appealing? Exactly the same dashboard with just a new design could look like that. So I took over the challenge to recreate the dashboard, but of course I hit a couple of limitations that we have if we just stick to, let's say, to standard visualization, standard capabilities that we got within the product. So I tried to think about, okay, how could we go beyond that? And what I found was the QS simple KPI object on branch.qlik.com. That was the first touch point that I had with the CSS stuff that we did. And as you might know, if you work with the MultiKPI object, which is in the bundled extensions. So for example, if we go here to a new sheet, just so that everyone knows what I'm talking about, if we go to edit the sheet, if we go to custom objects, for example, and now we also find it in the bundle extension. So in the, I think in the visualization bundle, there is something called the MultiKPI object. And the MultiKPI object has the possibility to implement style. So that was the first touch point where I saw, okay, there is a capability that gives you the opportunity to bring in additional styling to the dashboards. And this was exactly the starting point where we started our journey to go from that, from this to the dashboard that we saw. I did a couple of projects around that. Of course, we did a couple of POCs. And my colleagues also pretty often ask me, hey, Dennis, this is the dashboard. Could you do it? Could you make it now shiny and a little bit more user appealing before we go to the presentation? So I did that. But let's say after half of the year, my boss came around and said, okay, Dennis, is it possible to put your knowledge that you now collected to make things shiny and look greater again? Is it possible to push this into something that other people could also use? And we said, okay, we start to brainstorm about that. And that was exactly the thing where we started to work on the masterclass. Everything ended up in a community article where I tried to explain my 10 best tricks that I found out during my journey, making better applications. And to make it easy to handle, of course, I created the video, so you could just run through the video. But I think after this appointment today, you don't need to do this anymore. And what was the outcome of the project? The outcome was not just a PowerPoint presentation. I created an application, and in the application, we have a couple of sheets. And in these sheets, I just explain what I did there. So, and this is exactly the starting point, I think, for our today's agenda. Talk about how we implement CSS in Qlik Sense and how we could use it and what we could achieve with that. Any questions up front? Okay, doesn't seem to be. So let's jump into that application. As mentioned, the application, you could just download it in the community article. You could implement it, or you just can implement it in your Qlik Sense environment, and then you're good to go. I found out that I need to update the application due to the May release, because with the May release, we have a couple of new selectors that we need to keep in mind, and we need to implement, but I will update the version to the May release, but with the February release, it should work pretty fine. So what we do is, first I like to start with what kind of CSS possibilities do we got? Before we start with that, does everyone know what CSS is and what it's for?
Does get into style sheets?
Yeah, so that everyone, I think there's no question about that. So I just think that everyone knows for what it is. So CSS style sheet is a pretty easy syntax that you could implement to modify the so-called DOM model. If you like to see the DOM model of your internet page, you just click F12 to open the developer tools, and it will directly show you under elements the so-called DOM model, and the DOM model are the different elements that you got within a website. And of course, if you click on such kind of elements, so for example, on the right-hand side, you see the applied CSS code that gives the website the styling factors. So should it have a border? Should it have a background? Should it be a specific font that you like to use on the website? So this is what CSS is all about. And I found out that in Qlik Sense, we have a couple of possibilities to bring in CSS. So the first capability to bring in CSS is via using the theme. So as we introduced the theming capability in Qlik Sense, it also brought the capability with it to implement a theme CSS file into your theme. So this could be part of your theme. And in this CSS, so this CSS file will be automatically be applied as soon as you change the theme. So now you see this in the example. So of course, as said, you could just bring in your CSS definitions in a theme.css that's implemented in your theme. And this gives you the possibility to do, let's say, overall styling. So if you have style definitions that you like to implement on every sheet, you could do that. Of course, if you have specific styling for just specific objects on a specific sheet, it's of course capable, but it's not exactly what it's developed for. So there we got a different approach to do that. So for example, if I have a text box on one sheet and I want to give this an individual styling, these kind of things shouldn't be content of the theme CSS file. So here we talk about general things like, let's talk about the font that we use on every sheet, or if we have a specific color for the font or a specific color for the background, or if we like to disable or to hide buttons in the menu and so on and so forth. That's the theme capability. Then we got the possibility to work with so-called helper objects. Helper objects are objects that most of the time don't really have a function on your dashboard. So for example, as mentioned, there is the MultiKPI object that has the possibility to inject CSS, and it injects the CSS as soon as it gets rendered. And that's a little bit the trick about that. So if I have a specific CSS definition on a specific sheet, I just implement a MultiKPI object, for example, on that, implement my CSS definition into that object, and it gets rendered as soon, or it gets calculated as soon as the object gets rendered on this particular sheet. So this is how you could achieve just, let's say, specific definitions for a specific sheet. Of course, and that's the other capability these objects or the MultiKPI object is giving you. You got the possibility to work with an ampersand to just address this particular object. And this ampersand sign, in case you like to create a selector, for example, gives you the possibility to look up the div object and directly the object ID. So as soon as you just hit ampersand and then you write underneath your CSS definition, it just will affect the object where you have implemented that in. We will cover this a little bit later, but these are the three things where you could implement CSS definitions. So with that, just some, there's also, if we work with a helper object, what I most of the time do, of course, there's the MultiKPI object that you could use, which is part of the bundled extensions. So it's part of the standard. You don't need to install any kind of extensions. If you like to install extensions, I just want to advertise two extensions that I have created. One is the advanced KPI object, and the second one is the group container object. These are objects that I have created that also have the possibility to implement CSS. So for example, as we have done it here, this is, for example, the advanced KPI object I have created, and my CSS definition is also part of this object. So if I click on edit, if I go on my object that I've created, and if we go here on, I've triggered the effect, just give me a moment. So let's select that. And if you go, for example, to, I think we got it under appearance, there we have the possibility to also implement custom object CSS. But the great difference to the MultiKPI object is that you got a function box here. So this also gets calculated through the Qlik Sense engine. This means, for example, if you like to create an if statement in Qlik Sense that's calculating your expression, you could, after that, use different kind of CSS definition. So for example, if we have a positive KPI, let's make it red. If you have a negative KPI, let's make it red, otherwise green. So, and as you might already see in that example, we have also a couple of transactions here. If you just wait a couple of seconds, you see the background of the left box is blue. The background of the right box is changing. This is due to the KPI. This means the KPI is red, so it's performing bad. And if we just wait for a second, as the transaction has 20 seconds, it turns slowly red. This is something we could achieve by using CSS. And of course, we got the possibility, the other extension that I were talking about, but now it's the tab was the group container object. There's also an object that gives you the possibility to implement CSS. Exactly the same thing, but this object gives you the possibility to stack different master objects in one object. And it also gives you the possibility to implement CSS. So for example, if we click on that, you see the configuration of that container, but also here under appearance, under custom object CSS, you got exactly the same behavior as in the other objects. So if you don't want to stick to standard, or you just have use cases where you like to say, okay, I need a different KPI object, or I need a different container, take it and work with it. It also gives you the possibility to implement CSS. But it has also the functionality to execute Qlik script. Okay, so let's jump back and let's jump to the first tricks that we got. So if you work with that application, you could just navigate through the different sheets. On every sheet, you will get a trick. I think we've already talked about the first trick. Now you see on the left-hand side, I describe what I do, and I also describe the different CSS properties I use. And most of the time, I explain what kind of selector I use. On the right-hand side, you see a box where I explain the code that I'm using to achieve that. And yeah, so for example, in this example, I just want to show you how to use a helper object. Because most of the time you just use an helper object, but the object itself doesn't have a functionality. So for example, if you use the MultiKPI object just to bring in CSS code, and you don't want to use the CSS, or you just want to hide the object, this is what we try to achieve here. So hide the helper object. You could achieve this. So here we got now our helper object on the bottom. So if I click on edit, you see, I click on that. This is now a MultiKPI object, to be precise at that. So that's coming within standard. Then we got the styles. And here I got my definition that I got within that. But now I want to hide it, this particular object, because it doesn't have a functionality. So to do so, we could use this syntax. So we're searching for a div that has a TID, and then it's the object ID. So using this particular syntax gives us a possibility to hide objects in case if we work with opacity or display none. So how do I find out the object ID? I mean, as most of you know, you could just, or you can just add options/developer, for example, here, options/developer to find the object ID. Just let's do this for demo purposes. So now I got it. And if I do a right click, for example, on that box, you got the developer mode, and there you got the object ID. So in case you like to find that out. Otherwise, of course, if you click on F12 and you inspect your website, you could also hover over that. And the most top object, it should be that one, does have a QID. This is also a possibility how you could find out the object ID. And this is what we're addressing. So we're searching for a div that has a TID, which is on that. And then we like to say this on opacity 0, so make it transparent, or we set it to display none. And if we do that, so for example here, let's go to styles and let's change this to 0. It's away. And if I change this back, we can see it. Yeah? So that's the possibility how you start with the magic. Okay, let's go to the next trick. The next trick is the colored area background. In most of my projects, I need to create some kind of, let's say, a visual separator between the navigation and the content on the sheet. This is exactly what we got on that sheet. So on the left-hand side, we have a gray area. And on the right-hand side, we have a white area where we have our content on. And that's the question, how did we do that? It's pretty easy. So the solution is just this single line of code that is doing that. So what I do, I create a background image, and the background image has a linear gradient. So it changes from one color to another color. And the transition to that color is so sharp, I directly turn it at 14% to white. So we have gray, 14%, and then we have white until 1% on the right-hand side. And this gives me the possibility to always have 14% of the left side screen gray and the other percentage in white. And of course, if we turn this to 180 degree, it would come from the bottom to the top or the other way around. So that's pretty easy to just implement that. We could also work with more areas in that. So as you see it here, I got the background image. There we got the linear gradient. Now I work with 180 degree. This is what we did on the first sheet. So as you might, we got the first segment, the second segment, third one, fourth one. And then we create it here. So that's pretty easy. So if we go to edit the sheet, if we go to CSS config, let's make this a little bit bigger to understand that. Here you got the CSS statement, which starts here and ends here. And then we got the background image, the linear gradient. We got the gray, 14%. So for example, if I change this to 18%, you see that the bar gets bigger. There's no 1%. Let me get to 18%. Then we got the 18%. But let's change this again to 14%. The good thing is, I mean, we are already working with a responsive design. So this responsive design, so for example, if I change this to a smaller amount, it also matches. So that's, I think, a perfect way to create a segmentation between that. If you work with these examples, you already got, or you got the button here that's called CSS config here. So you could just click on that and you see what kind of CSS code I've used for that example. I've also used other CSS code to make this look as it looks. And this is in most of the cases in the second box. So if you like to look that up, so for example, these code boxes that I've created here, you could have a look on this CSS I've used for that on that side. So for example, I have I took out the background color of the text boxes on top here, for example. I took out the background color from the filter panes and so on and so forth. So there's a second box on the sheet where you got all of these configurations in there, just to for explanation.
Dennis, we had a question in the chat regarding if you can use the master visualizations as well for inserting this the CSS code.
What do you mean with that? I mean, if so the thing is, the object that's holding the CSS definition needs to be placed on a canvas to get rendered.
Yeah, sorry. So can you hear me?
Yeah, can you?
Okay, so what I mean is I have a master visualization that's basically a list box and a filter pane. And when you drag it on a sheet, it gets its own unique ID. But still in the properties, you can see the master visualization ID. So I was wondering if you can use CSS to basically tag that master visualization ID. So whenever you drag it on a different sheet, you don't have to redo the CSS, because now on every sheet you have to redo the CSS.
Of course. I mean, that's a good idea. Never ever thought about that. I think that's a good idea. I mean, as far as the selector hits the target, it's fine.
Yeah,
But
I tried to use it, but I didn't
yeah.
quite understand how you needed to do it, because it's basically you can't use the TID div. So it somehow it didn't work. So I was just wondering if it's possible anyway, or if I was using the wrong method.
I mean, the best thing is just to work with the inspector and to hover over the object that you like to get. So for example, let's take that box. And then you directly navigate to the object that you got here. And I mean, all of the classes, IDs, and let's say options that we have set up here in the different objects are addressable via the CSS selector. So as soon as we got something here that's unique, so this is also another thing, it needs to be unique. If we work with an ID, so for example, if we ask for an ID, but the ID is appearing 2 times, it won't match and it won't be applied to your dashboard. So this could also be the thing. So as soon as you say, okay, we got master visualizations and I got 2 of them on the canvas, the ID is not finding the target anymore. Could also be the case. But as soon as the selector is working, I mean, this is something where we really need to dig a little bit more in detail. So how the selector is working, but this is how I try to find my my selectors.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's jump on the next sheet. It's called the filter pane highlighting. And most of the time I'm using that in this, and I'll just show you a real example. I mean, everyone loves the custom report. So that's really, let's say, an evergreen that we got within Qlik Sense, and also coming from the Qlik View history. Well, we just click on KPIs and dimensions, and we directly get our table. But the problem is that normally I like to guide my users a little bit more, that these 2 filter panes that are just bringing in my dimensions and my measures are not treated exactly the same as my normal selections. To do that, I can do, let's say, a color indication on that. To do so, where do we get it? Just need to drag that here. And for that, we could use the code also of CSS. So for example, I mean, as we all know, filter panes normally white, but now I like to turn them into blue. To do so, we have 2 examples in that thing here. So the first example is this 2 definitions that we got within here. So the first definition is we're addressing the object via the object ID. And the next thing that we're searching for is the class QV collapsed listbox. Let's do F12. First, we're searching for the object that's containing the object ID, which is, I think it's that. No, it's not that one. It's already that one here. So here we got the object ID. And after that, I'm searching for an object that has the class. The dot indicates that we're searching for a class, QV collapsed listbox. And let's search for that. Where do we got it? So if we scroll a little bit down here, QV object, somewhere we will find it. QV object filter pane. I think if we scroll a little bit down, we will find it somewhere here. Otherwise, you just might take it as given. But I think, where do we got it? So we got the filter pane, collapsed. Okay, I don't find it right now. But this is what we're searching in the DOM model, and then we say, okay, we want to change the background for that to this particular color, which is obviously the blue. And these two lines of code give me the possibility to, so the first one is changing the background color of the filter pane. The second one is changing the font color of the text that we got within the filter pane. Of course, when I click on that, we got the normal definition, but now it's a little bit separated from the standard. Of course, there's a possibility if I have a filter pane box and I just want to color particular boxes in here, to go with the nth child or the nth type of the definition. This is what we do in the second example. So then we also got 3 definitions for the 3 boxes. And we also got the definition to change the color of the fonts here. And there you see that we got also the filter panel collapsed, and we got the nth of type. So we want to have the 5th one, we want to have the 3rd one, we want to have the 6th one of that. And then we could just change the color to that one we want to have. So this is what we do here. I think there was a question in the chat.
He was basically explaining Mark how he could
Okay.
do that.
Okay, let's take that a little bit later. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the trick. So just search in for the nth child or the nth of type and change the color or changing all of them in a filter pane. Okay. Next one is, and I pretty often get the question from our customers where people say, hey, we got the Qlik Sense native client. I want to hide buttons there. So for example, the edit button, the selection bar, the bookmark button, and all of that stuff that comes with the client. Is there a possibility to do that? I mean, normally we say, oh, well, there's not a possibility to do that. Not even a security rule could achieve that, as I know. Maybe yeah, I think not even a security rule could achieve that. But it could be, or you can hide that by using a CSS definition. So also by working with, for example, the expression display none. You just need to know what kind of TID the button has. And that's pretty easy, as I think. So for example, or what we see here is now we don't have a selection bar. We don't have the bookmark button anymore. I see that also the navigation buttons are looking now a little bit different. If we click on the sheet, the Insight Advisor is not showing up anymore. So it's also possible to hide these kind of information. And it's pretty easy. As you see, for example, to hide the bookmark button in the toolbar, we just need to search for a button with an TID. So this is the unique identifier for the button. So we just don't want to show it anymore. So for example, if we want to, let's say, hide the data model viewer, for example, I click on F12. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to find that out because it directly disappears. But otherwise, to do so, I could click on that. Right click. There's no right click anymore. Okay, let's do it here. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to have both on the same screen. I just search for that object. And now you see this one is having a TID. So for example, if I just copy the TID and let's bring it to my CSS configuration here, and I want to, let's switch this one here to the TID. It's not appearing anymore. So that's pretty easy to, let's say, create your own client if you like, or you want to disable some functionality on a particular sheet. With that, it's possible. Of course, it's not unbreakable. So I think if people really want to or know that you're doing that, they could just bypass that by commenting that line of code out. But I think the normal user doesn't know that you're doing this over that way. So let's data model viewer. Okay, so that's the trick. And of course, here you got other functionalities to also add a little bit more styling. I think somewhere we have, for example, here the color red and the background. So with that, I am searching for an LI object, and I'm searching for a TID, and also I can change the color and the background of that, and this turns into that, so that we get a gray background, red color, and also this gives us the possibility to, let's say, implement a little bit more look and feel of the corporate design of customer, if we like to do so. Okay, next one. Next one is using background pictures, as you see it here. For example, in our standard demo, we do this on the first sheet. And sometimes, yeah, this could, or it can just help you to make it look more fancy. Or, for example, if you have a picture where you have some explanations on to explain the application in more detail, you can just bring in your background picture here. So what I've done is also use CSS here. I addressed a background picture that is part of the theme. So it's hosted on the Qlik Sense server somewhere in the extensions. To be precise, it's hosted in the theme itself, and I bring it into the sheet as a background picture. To do so, there are a couple of things we can do. So first, the first thing is that we need to clarify is that the picture is addressable, so it's hosted somewhere. Maybe it's part of the content library on the Qlik Sense server, or it's a part of the application itself because you have uploaded it to the application, or it's addressable through a theme. And if you want to do this, for example, in the cloud version of Qlik Sense, this is working a little bit different. But before we come to that, of course, I've also documented the way how to achieve this in the cloud version. And so here, but first I like to just explain it here in for the normal Qlik Sense or Windows version. So what we do is I search for the grid wrap. The grid wrap is let's say the main window where we got the canvas on. And there I just bring in a background and I address a URL. As you see here, I have an app content. So app content means it's part of the application itself. And then I need to change the app ID. So it needs to point to the app ID that's holding the picture. Of course, that's not good, I would say, because in case you export the application and import the application again, or you just publish the application, it gets a new ID and you need to change this afterwards. And then I address the background picture. If you work with the standard MultiKPI object, there's no other way to do that. So you really need to know what kind of ID you have or what's the extension name or so on and so forth. If you do this with the extensions I have produced, so the group container object or the advanced KPI object, you could work with the Qlik Sense expression document name. Document name will automatically give you the document ID. And if you use that, I mean, it's you could just copy it and import it into other sites. It will work. And then we got the background. We got a couple of background statements I use, and this is the definition I think is the best to bring in a sheet, because it's directly rendering and make that responsive a little bit. So I think this setting that I use is the best setting to bring in a sheet. So it's always centered, and yeah, it's not bigger than 100% to make it look good. If you want to use background pictures in the cloud version, currently there's just the possibility to first implement it into the app. So by uploading it into the app, and then you need to work with such kind of of a URL to address it here. So API, v1, apps, app ID, media files, files, image name, like that. If you, or I think the better way is to bring it into a theme. Then you need to find out the so-called theme ID. And the theme ID can be found out. So for example, if we go, let's just jump to a cloud tenant to see how this is looking. Because I think this is not pretty known. Just give me a second. Where do we got it? Let's jump into standard demos. There, industry partner workflow, app development. Oh, okay. I need to click on apps. Then I will find it. Standard demos. And there we got also the demo. And you will see that this gets implemented a little bit different. So for example, if we click here on the same sheet, this is also bringing in the background picture. As soon as it's loaded. Normally just it needs to be directly here. Yeah, there we got it. And if I click on F12, so what we try to do is now we want to find out what is the theme ID. If you go on sources, sources will always give you the hosts of the different content that you're using on the website. And now you see, for example, we are using content from Sense app, the app ID and a sheet and so on and so forth. But you also found that we get API v1. If we click on that, and there you see we're using a theme, and there is the theme ID that we're using. This is pretty cryptical, so it's not that easy to find that out. You also, most of the time, you really need to investigate by using the developer tools to get the theme ID. So that's the first way how you could do that. There's also the way to observe the console. So if you go to the management backend from Qlik Sense Cloud, you could also use the developer tools to observe the different themes, and somewhere in the properties you will find it. But this is what you need to know, and after that you could reference the files that we got within the folder. And as you see here, we got the background picture, and we address it over that way. Does it look a little bit hacky?
Yeah, to me it does.
Okay.
Dennis, we had one more question. Stefano posted an interesting questions with regard if you can insert variables in the CSS.
You can do it, but you just can do it in by using my extensions. The normal Qlik Sense MultiKPI object. I will show you why. One moment. If we go to that one here, this is a normal MultiKPI object. And if I go to styles, it's just a string that we could implement. Yeah, so just the possibility to bring in a string, no possibility to use any kind of formals and formulas. And in my extension, so for example, the group container extension or the MultiKPI extension, let me just, too many browsers open. If we just click on the object on top of that, I have implemented that by using a normal Qlik function box. And here we got the Qlik Sense functionality, so the formulas, for example, if and else, and then we got the CSS statement. So of course, if we like, we could also yeah, vote that out and work with an ampersand and work with a variable at that point, for example.
So this could be a solution to in order to make dynamic images based on selections, for example.
Yeah. What's the name of the extension? The first one, this is the Advanced KPI Object. You can find it on branch.qlik.com or developers.qlik.com. That's the new name. The other extension is called the Group Container Object. Here you could just get the possibility to group master items and arrange them in a box. This object also gives you the possibility to implement custom object CSS as soon as we enable that. You see the box, and the box is also working with, or it comes with, let's say, Qlik formula capabilities.
And both on branch.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump back. That was the background picture. I think it's more hacky than someone might expect when you start working with that. Let's go to the table modifications. Pretty often people say Qlik has nasty tables if it comes to designing. I had a customer that says, okay, well, your product is looking great and brilliant and it's shiny, it's modern, all that stuff, but I never ever seen looking worst table in my life. So that was really the nastiest table he has ever seen in his life. Also, if he was talking about the pivot table. We also got the possibility to change the table look and feel and the pivot table look and feel by using CSS. I just Googled a little bit around, and I found, for example, if we go to Google and I search for table design CSS, I was searching for a couple of pictures and I found a few of them where I said, okay, that's looking good. So that was initially my inspiration, how I create the table. And then I started to also work through that. So definition by definition. So the first thing was, okay, we need to change, for example, the background to get that. To do so, I created the lines of code. So you see the examples on the top and you see the use code underneath that. So it's not the many expressions that I have used to achieve that. And on the top, I explain all of these 6 use statements in both examples. I think this was a little bit extend the time that we have to explain all of these examples, but maybe we just take one. For that, I want to use the pivot table. On the right-hand side, the first thing that I did is I changed the header of the pivot table. I don't want to have the blocks in the header that you could move around, but most of the time it's just wasted space because people aren't working with that. Or I want to put the space that I have for the numbers and for the dimensions. To do so, it can be done by just using one line of code. TID meter rows, TID meter columns, set it on display none, and it won't be displayed anymore. And also we got the possibility to disable the header row cells. So if you use them, you get rid of the header of a pivot table, and it looks a little bit more like a normal standard table. Then I changed a little bit the border from the bottom. So the border bottom is this particular border that we got within the header here. Then we changed the background color for rows that are odd. So this is what brings me the different color styling. So odd rows will be displayed in a darker gray. Background cleansing plus icons. Okay, I set the position of a couple of icons to unset. I really need to have a look on what I exactly did, but I think it's about the icons on the left-hand side. I removed them, or I just repositioned them to look correct. And then we need to style a little bit the header. So the header, that is the background color that we got. So the font size, the color, and the background color of the header, which is that one. And so now we got a completely different looking pivot table. And this is also working when I put it to full screen. So it's definitely, I think, something that's working for the customers if they want to get rid of any kind of stuff that we got within the pivot table that's maybe driving them a little bit crazy sometimes.
And do you know a possibility to align the column name?
The column name?
Yeah, in a pivot table.
What is meant by column name and to align them?
The dimension name.
So to bring them here, for example.
Yeah, I would assume to left or right, or maybe Stefano, you can specify.
I think there's also apply changes, discard. I think if we go to presentation and go to fully expand, well, fully expand in 10 rows. I know we need to have a closer look on that. So where I need to reposition, of course, I think there's a possibility to give you a short answer to reposition the dimension titles into that bar. But I need to look at the code. I just need to do some experiments there.
But it should be pretty much standard CSS, I would assume.
Yeah, of course. Just take it out, or I think that's possible. Okay. Then let's make this a little bit smaller. Putting in 10 rows. No. Exit full screen. So this is how you could work with tables and pivot tables. Say there was currently not really a table that was not possible to achieve by using CSS to completely redesign it. In some customer projects, I get, I would say, pretty precise definitions how the table needs to look. And it was always possible to achieve that by using CSS. Of course, sometimes you need to write a lot of code to achieve that, but in the end, it's possible. And if you put this kind of definition into the theme CSS, you can also transport it to end printing, or for example, to the styling of if you reuse a visualization in a Meetup or so on, or other ways you like to share your visualizations. So if it is in the theme, you can reuse it. There's also, I think, currently, this was one of the last things we implement is reusing themes in end printing, I think. And with this functionality, if you transport your CSS code into your theme, you could transport it to end printing. Okay. Any questions to that? Okay, doesn't look like. Then let's go to the last or to the next one. I don't think it's the last one, but it's the next one.
Or maybe we just, I missed one question, but it's not with regards to the table. It's with regard to the CSS formula field, which is not standard when you download it via branch.qlik.com. So do you think it will ever get implemented in a supported version?
For the MultiKPI object that we, I was talking about that with our product manager for visualizations, and he found the idea pretty interesting and good. That's it. Maybe in the future, but I haven't seen that on the roadmap currently. But it also, I think it's a pretty small fix. Maybe someone will implement it, but yeah, that's really something I can't answer. But I've addressed that this would be a good solution or a good functionality that we could enrich the MultiKPI object with.
Can we somehow push that request in the forum to give it more reach?
Ideas. We got ideas in the Qlik community. Ideas is the possibility to bring in your ideas and to vote them up or down if they are good. So just bring it to the ideas in the Qlik community in the section and vote it up. That's the possibility how we could address it. Otherwise, I mean, the product management is aware of that, but the problem that we have is that we prioritization. So they need to prioritize their functionalities they like to implement. They just have limited resources in development. So it's not easy sometimes to get the developers to do that and to prioritize your idea that you have. But there's a fixed amount of features that comes to the releases through the ideas section. Okay. So it could be that the product manager can't get development resources to implement it, but it could be if it gets voted high in the ideas section that it comes through that way into the product before the product management gets the developer resources. Okay.
So it's somewhere in the community. I'm just.
It's in the community. It's called the ideas section. So ideas in the community. I could after that send you the link to that if you like, but you find it in the Qlik community.
Okay.
I think there are a couple of thousand ideas now in there, and I think 10% of all ideas were released in the product. I mean, it's just 10%, but it's more than 100 ideas. So not that bad, as I think.
Mm.
Okay. That's the one where we want to talk about. I think we're 5 o'clock, but maybe you just bear with me for a couple of minutes. I think we will need 5 to 10 minutes to walk through the content. So if you like to stay with us, I would be very happy. What I've done here is called moving objects. Moving object is also used in this example where you got the normal line chart and you got the simple KPI, or you got the advanced KPI chart here. And if we close the edit mode, you can't visually detect if it's just one object or it's many objects that we're using. It looks like one. So this is exactly the effect I like to get. And this is by moving objects, just a few percent to the left, to the right, to the bottom, removing borders, removing backgrounds, and then it looks like one object. In this example, you see 3 normal standard KPI boxes and a normal line chart. And if I go to full screen, you see, okay, I just full screen, or I do the full screen on the object, not on all of that. This can be achieved if we just remove or we just move the objects. So now you see the first one changes the size for the left and mid KPI object. So here we say we want to change the height to 14.4%. I think before that it was 13%, something like that. And the calculation function calculates the window size, and it gives you the percentage and pixel back, and this is a new height of the object. So you need to do a few experiments, what's the right value you need to implement here, but this this value makes it a little bit bigger to the bottom. And also from the width perspective. So we also do it a little bit, we give it a little bit more width to overlap here. And this is what we do with all of the other objects as well. So for example, here we got the right object. The right object, we need to also have a different height, but not the width, because this one is overlapping and this object is overlapping. This doesn't need to overlap. It just needs to have a different size in height. So it overlaps to the bottom, all of the 3 objects. After that, next trick is to just remove the borders. I mean, normally there's a border that goes around the object. And with that, I say border right, border bottom, none, important. Important always says, if there's a previous definition and we override it, and we say, okay, we want to hide them. And in the end, that's the trick. Just make the objects a little bit bigger and remove borders. And then it looks like one object. And due to the percentage, it's responsive. Yeah. It looks like one object. So I think that's a pretty easy one. Okay. Last but not least, changing fonts. Where do I change fonts? I think changing fonts is pretty easy in by working with the theme. And especially if you have your own font files, you got the possibility to just implement your fonts. So on the bottom here, you see an example font that I was using, or an example theme. The theme has two fonts. It has a CSS definition. It has the text file that defines the theme itself, and it has a JSON definition. And on the right-hand side, you see what is the content of the JSON definition, and you see the content of the CSS definition. So that's the theme that I've created. And you see what the theme is doing. So you see we have different font style for the main header, for the subtitle, and also, for example, for all other text fields or for other text content that we got within the chart. So the hover menu, the axis, and all other things as well. So also the values. And this is what we used for that. So just a few lines of code. In the CSS file, you need to inject the font. So you need to say, okay, I want to read from that. You do this with font face. You define your own name. And then you, with source, you can address the file, and you say in what kind of font definition you like to load it. So here we have the two files. So we got Caviar Dreams Bold. These are these two files. And then you go to the JSON file, and in the JSON file, it's pretty easy to implement that. It's just custom styles. So you need to reference in the JSON that you want to read something from the CSS file. The things that we have implemented in the CSS file for Caviar Dreams Bold will be read here. So we have the CSS definition where we read from. And then we got the font family, and the font family we like to use in all objects, in all titles, in the main title. And in the main titles for all objects, it should have 28 pixel as font size, and it should use that font. And all other fonts should just use Caviar Dreams normal. Of course, I think here you need to have a little bit experience in how to work with the JSON model in the JSON definition to create a theme that's using a font. But I have also implemented on top the links to the, let me just copy that out, to the help sites. And there's one site on the help site that explains you, which is explaining the whole JSON tree in the themes. So if you scroll down here, you see all of the possible properties that we got within. And if we click on example, and you see the full example, you get one example that is using every property. So this is a completely created JSON theme file, which of course is pretty long, but there you could see, okay, what kind of properties I can set within the JSON file. So just recommending that, but it's also part of the application. Okay.
And where do you put the TTF file?
The TTF file is part of the theme. Let me just jump back. Where do we get it? Here we go. Just back one moment. So this is the Explorer view of my theme. TTF, CSS, text, JSON. So these 5 files are part or the whole content of my theme. There you see the CSS definition, the JSON definition. Yeah, that's it. So I just show in that sheet here all the content that I got within the theme. And this looks like that if you're just using it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the easiest way to implement new fonts. I think also it's the thing that most people want to see. So every time we talk about theming with customers, with prospects and all this stuff, they say, okay, I want to see our corporate font style in Qlik Sense. Please do that. And yeah, it's pretty easy in just a couple of clicks. The problem is that in our documentation, I think it's pretty hard to find how it's working. But this is exactly how it's working. And I think the easiest way to achieve that if customers or prospects are asking that. Okay. With that, there is one last trick, but the last trick is how to change the grid by working with the Engine API Explorer. So for example, if you want to change the grid to, let's say, 45 rows and 100 columns, there is a way to work with get layout, set properties, and to change the queue layout. So really changing the meta definition of your application in the background to get your custom grid. I also have implemented a YouTube video that is showing you that. So if you just run through that, I think it's 4 minutes where I explain every comment that I use to change the grid. And after that, you have a grid that matches your need. So if you say, okay, I really want to have 30 or let's say 50 columns and I need to have 100 rows, you could do it with that to somehow or get a little bit more feeling to work with a pixel perfect dashboard. You could also say, okay, I want to have 1024 and let's say 600 rows and 1024 columns, for example. So to work with a more pixel feeling. But this is what I wouldn't recommend. So if you need to work with custom grids, this could be your solution, but it would take no too long to run through that. So just walk through the video. I think it's self-explaining. And with that, I think we're done with that. And yeah, that is the application. Just download it, read through that. In case you have any kind of questions, you could just address them in the community article. I think there are a couple of people are already very active in the article. So when I've published it, it was, or many people were interested in that and start to communicate here. So if you like, just do that. And yeah, I'm happy to help here over the comment section in case you have any questions.
Thank you. We just had one last question from Patrick. He's asking if there are CSS changes between versions.
Yeah, there are CSS changes. I wrote a couple of CSS selectors. So for example, for this demo, the CSS for that demo I wrote, I think, I would say 1.5 years ago, and I never ever had to change a single line of code for that demo. And we use quite a lot in here. So this is, let's say, writing robust selectors. Other things like the CSS Masterclass, I need to rewrite the code a little bit for a few selectors with the last release. It's a little bit, yeah, depending on. I mean, there's no guarantee that the code that you will write will work in all further versions. But to be honest, it's not that much code you need to rewrite. Sometimes it's just, okay, the class name has changed. I need to look up the new class name and bring it in again, and then it's working again. So this could be your work if you use this extensively. Or just think about how you could write robust code. Where it's like, okay, these are definitions that normally Qlik never ever should change.
Yeah, something like a changelog would be great, I guess.
Not possible.
An official one, you know.
Also, as an internal employee, I don't have the possibility to look that up. So for me, it's also try and error to work through the definitions when a new release is out.
Maybe another point for the ideas section.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, then great. Thank you very much for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Was great to see. I'm sort of a newbie when it comes to web development, and we're just starting dive into that. So I'm very curious, and I hope the others are too. I'm a little disappointed that we put it on WebEx and not on Google, because the stream the chat will be lost, and yeah, maybe that's something to improve for the next meetup sessions.
I mean, you could just copy it, right? Just paste it,
Yeah.
copy and paste it.
Yeah, maybe I will do that. But yeah, for me it was an awesome article you wrote, and I think as well the community gave you very positive feedback. So thank you for doing it. Please continue to find stuff like this, how we can further improve it. And yeah, are there any final questions, or otherwise we will conclude the sessions?
I think people also could just unmute themselves if they like to communicate. There's more than the chat.
Yeah, but they never dare to. I always tell them, and they usually don't. They are scared.
So I have a bit unrelated question. It's a bit in your direction. Maybe you can answer it, or someone in the chat who's already talking about this stuff. It's less about CSS, but it's a bit more about extensions. So I'm using the built-in Angular JS for the extensions, and I'm trying to react to changes in the layout. So when you use the paint function in the extension API, it re-renders when something changes. So if you select something or if the window changes, and I couldn't find any resource on how to do this via Angular. So I found something about watching the layout and so on, but this doesn't trigger every time. Do you know anything, any point where to get into that?
When something in the layout changes of the object, you want to do something, right?
Yeah. No, generally the window changes or something re-renders. So because the paint function realizes this, if anything changes in the application, it will re-render the visualization. But when you use the Angular controller, it doesn't do that by default. You have to watch something or you have to react to some other event, and I don't know which event you have to look at. So you can watch the layout object changing, but this only triggers, I think, when you switch the sheets, then this will change, but there's no indication inside the layout object about the whole application.
Okay. Pretty hard to answer that. I think if someone really has the knowledge in our team to do that, I mean, I also wrote a couple of extensions, but normally I just need to watch this particular object, so not more. I just do watches to some kind of properties that I got within the object that I define. But if you, I think Riley McDonald could be the right guy to ask him this question. He maybe could answer the question. I definitely not. I just work with it as it is, to be honest.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, unless there are more questions, thank you for attending the session. Thank you very much for sharing that content, Dennis.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Maybe we can have you again on the show when you have some news. I will try to follow your blog.
Yeah, I'm collecting new things, new features, in case you got a couple of cool CSS definitions. So you say, okay, this is pretty handy and could be useful for others. I would love to create a version 2 of that, to collect 10 new tricks I can present or I could share with the community. So as soon as you got a couple of cool tricks or just one trick that you'd like to share, just reach out to me, give it to me, and I try to create version 2 of the CSS Masterclass.
Can I ask, how can we get hold of you? Because I've got an idea for you to add to your extension.
Okay, just do that via my
Slack
email
group.
address.
Are you on the Slack group in the branch?
Yeah, but I never look into Slack. So this won't help you. So just reach out to me via email. So dennis.jaskowiak@qlik.com.
Okay, I will do.
Thank you very much.
Then thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.